Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
Gala of Deceit. The flash of paparazzi cameras was a physical assault. Zendaya Coleman, blinking against the onslaught, forced a smile. The gangway of the Poseidon's gift stretched before her, draped in shimmering sapphire fabric. Tonight, she was the prize, the guest of honor. The very reason hundreds of wealthy patrons had shelled out exorbitant sums. It made her skin crawl a little. The feeling of being an object, even for a good cause. Just breathe. Her publicist, Maria, whispered, adjusting the fall of Zendaya's emerald gown. Remember the children, darling. Think of the water purification systems. Zendaya nodded, the image of thirsty children in drought-stricken lands a potent antidote to her unease. She straightened, offering a genuine smile this time, and stepped onto the plush carpet. Jason Statham, leaning against a marble pillar near the entrance to the grand ballroom, looked utterly out of place. His dark suit, though impeccably tailored, lacked the ostentatious gleam of the surrounding finery. He nursed a glass of sparkling water, his gaze sweeping the room, missing nothing. He wasn't interested in the jewelry or the designer dresses. He was cataloging exits, assessing sightlines, noting the positions of security personnel, or rather, the alarming lack thereof. He'd been hired as a security consultant by the cruise line, a polite euphemism for a fixer who anticipates trouble. The captain, a nervous man with perpetually damp palms, seemed more concerned with the vintage champagne than potential threats. Statham had already identified a dozen security breaches, from unguarded service entrances to blind spots on the promenade deck. This opulent cage was a sitting duck. Zendaya's voice, amplified by the ship's sound system, drew his attention. She was on stage, delivering a heartfelt speech about the importance of sustainable water resources. She spoke with passion, her words resonating even in this atmosphere of forced gaiety. Statham found himself grudgingly impressed. She wasn't just a pretty face spouting platitudes. He scanned the faces in the crowd at a portly man with a walrus mustache, dripping in diamonds, who kept glancing nervously at his watch, at a group of tanned, impeccably dressed Europeans, their conversation hushed and intense. A lone woman in a severe black dress, her eyes narrowed, fixed on Zendaya with unsettling intensity. Statham took a sip of his water, the bubbles doing little to quench the dry feeling in his throat. This wasn't just a collection of wealthy do-gooders. Something felt off the air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation, crackled with a subtle undercurrent of tension. He watched as Zendaya finished her speech to thunderous applause. She looked relieved, a small, almost imperceptible sigh escaping her lips as she stepped down from the stage. She was immediately engulfed by a swarm of admirers, all vying for her attention. Maria, her publicist, was a formidable barrier, deflecting unwanted advances with practiced ease. She steered Zendaya towards a buffet table laden with elaborate pastries and miniature canapes. "Don't eat anything," Maria hissed, her smile fixed. "You know how you get around shellfish." Zendaya rolled her eyes playfully. "Relax, Maria, I can handle a tiny shrimp." She reached for a canapé, but a hand, surprisingly strong, gently stayed hers. "I wouldn't," Statham said, his voice low and gravelly. "There's a distinct smell of almonds. Could be cyanide." Zendaya stared at him, her smile faltering. Maria gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Who are you?" Maria demanded, her voice sharp. "Jason Statham," he replied, offering a curt nod. "Security consultant. And possibly the only thing standing between you and a very bad night." He pointed to a waiter discreetly slipping away from the buffet table. "He's your man. Check his pockets, you'll find a vial of something nasty." Maria, after a moment of stunned silence, barked an order at a nearby security guard. The guard, looking bewildered, lumbered towards the fleeing waiter. Zendaya regarded Statham with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "Cyanide? Really? Highly improbable, but prudent," he said. "This whole setup smells wrong. Too much money, too little security, and too many people with hidden agendas." The ship lurched slightly, a subtle tremor that went unnoticed by most. But Statham felt it, a deep vibration that resonated through the hull. He glanced out the panoramic windows, his eyes narrowing, the sea, normally a shimmering expanse of black velvet under the moonlight, seemed darker, angrier. "We have a problem," he said, his voice grim, "and I don't think it has anything to do with tainted canapes." A blood-curdling scream echoed through the ballroom, followed by the shattering of glass. The music screeched to a halt, plunging the room into stunned silence. The gala of deceit had officially begun. Ocean's fury. The clatter of dropped silverware was the first sign, barely audible over the thrum of the ship's engines and the cheerful chatter of the gala. Then came the shouts, guttural and sharp, fracturing the festive atmosphere like shattering glass. Eva Rostova stood at the top of the grand staircase. A sleek, black pistol held aloft, the light from the chandelier glinted off the weapon, turning it into a beacon of dread. "Silence!" Her voice, amplified by a strategically placed microphone, cut through the rising panic that it was a voice accustomed to command, cold and unwavering. "This vessel is now under the control of Ocean's fury." Below her, chaos erupted. A waiter tripped, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. A woman screamed, her voice high-pitched and hysterical. Men, still holding half-eaten canapes, looked around in confusion, unsure whether this was some bizarre form of entertainment. Marco the Hammer Moretti, a hulking figure with a shaved head and a network of brutal scars crisscrossing his arms, materialized beside Rostova. He held a wicked-looking machete, its blade reflecting the panicked faces in the crowd. He didn't speak, but his presence was a more potent threat than any words. "We have no desire to harm you, provided you cooperate," Rostova continued, her voice regaining a semblance of calm. "We are here to deliver a message the world desperately needs to hear." Two more figures, masked and clad in black tactical gear, emerged from the shadows, flanking Rostova and Moretti. They carried automatic rifles, their movements precise and professional. The atmosphere in the grand hall shifted from confusion to palpable fear. A man in a Navy uniform, presumably a member of the ship's security, attempted to intervene. He charged towards Rostova, shouting something unintelligible. Moretti intercepted him with brutal efficiency. A swift kick to the gut, a sickening crunch, and the man crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. "Anyone else wish to be a hero?" Moretti roared, his voice a gravelly rasp. He brandished the machete, the polished steel now stained with a crimson smear. The remaining security personnel, stationed near the exits, hesitated, fear warring with duty. Rostova ignored the spectacle. "My name is Eva Rostova," she announced, her voice resonating through the hall, "and I am the voice of a dying planet. For too long, you, the privileged elite, have plundered its resources, choked its oceans, and poisoned its air. Tonight, the reckoning begins." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. She saw fear, disbelief, and a flicker of something else, perhaps a nascent understanding. "Our demands are simple," she continued. $1 billion, payable to the Ocean Preservation Fund, a complete and verifiable cessation of all deep-sea mining operations, and a public apology from the CEOs of the 10 largest polluting corporations. "You have 12 hours. A murmur of protest rippled through the crowd. Someone dared to shout, "You're insane! You can't just—" "I assure you," Rostova interrupted, her voice laced with steel, "I can, and I will. Consider this your first lesson in accountability. Any attempt to contact the authorities, any act of defiance, will be met with swift and decisive action." Moretti punctuated her words with a menacing growl. Hefting his machete, Rostova gestured towards the masked figures. "My associates will now collect your personal electronic devices. Any attempt to conceal them will be unpleasant." The masked figures moved through the crowd, their rifles held at the ready. The passengers, their faces pale with terror, slowly began to surrender their phones and tablets. The sounds of the ship, the gentle hum of the engines, the distant crash of waves, seemed to amplify the silence that had descended upon the grand hall, a silence broken only by the occasional sob and the rustling of expensive fabrics. Eva Rostova surveyed her domain. The grand hall, once a symbol of opulence and excess, was now a prison, and she, the self-proclaimed savior, held the key. Her face was impassive, but inside, A storm raged. The ocean's fury had found its human voice, and tonight, the world would hear its screams, signals, and shadows. Zendaya loathed the sequins, trapped in the glittering sheath. She felt like a prize showbird. All glitz and no grit. This charity gala, ostensibly for ocean preservation, reeked of a high-stakes cattle call. Each camera flash, every lascivious stare, deepened her unease when the alarm screeched, a jarring discordance against the sugary music. She nearly embraced the pandemonium. Nearly that a hulking figure, face hidden by a cheap mask, seized her wrist. His hold possessed surprising restraint, yet his aim remained clear. He steered her from the ballroom's ostentation toward the ship's underbelly. Panic was a non-permissible emotion, and she suppressed it, affecting acquiescence. She permitted him to guide her through the dwindling crowds in the corridors, her brain already formulating a plan. Casually, she worked loose the clasp of the extravagant diamond bracelet, a loan from the evening's jeweler. More than just ostentatious, it concealed a miniature, bespoke distress beacon, pricey. Certainly, but her tech confidant had foreseen contingencies like this. Turning a corner, the man's grip tightened. "Move it," he rasped. His voice muffled. Here was her opening. Zendaya faltered, feigning clumsiness as she went down. She deliberately abraded the bracelet against the corrugated metal of a nearby access panel. The almost silent click as the beacon armed was easily lost amidst the swelling din of chaos engulfing the vessel. She prayed it sufficed. The signal, crafted for subtlety, invisible to most scans, possessed the power to reach a specific frequency, keyed to a single recipient, mimicking the pain of a sprained ankle. Zendaya cried out. The man hesitated, his grasp relaxing slightly. The moment was there. She lashed out with her foot, connecting sharply with his tibia. Not a knockout, but sufficient to break his hold. She scrambled upright and fled, the sequins of her dress mirroring the dim emergency lights. The ship's passageways were a steel warren of pipes and wires. Zendaya trusted her instincts, following the faint thrum of power, knowing that conduits often paralleled service routes. Reaching a junction box, she ripped open the cover, ignoring the spitting arcs of electricity. Her fingers flew across the terminals, bypassing the ship's conventional communications. A direct plea was too risky. They would be listening instead. She infiltrated the emergency broadcast, layering a subliminal signal within the pre-recorded instructions about life vest locations. A solitary, high-frequency tone, barely perceptible, pulsed every 10 seconds. A digital scream, a coded SOS decipherable only by someone with the proper gear and specialized knowledge. A gamble, undeniably, but her last resort. *****. Jason observed the escalating turmoil from the shadows of the lower decks. Rostova's operatives, well-armed and disconcertingly organized, moved with cold calculation. They had barricaded the primary exits, funneling the passengers toward the ballroom. The ship's security force, composed primarily of glorified doormen, were swiftly neutralized. He scrutinized Rostova herself, a woman whose glacial composure proved more chilling than the assault rifle slung across her torso. She surveyed the scene with a dispassionate amusement, as if orchestrating an elaborate game. Jason navigated with seamless grace, a shadow among shadows, his senses at their peak. He registered every detail. The number of visible sentries, their placement, the ship's structural configuration, the access routes to ventilation shafts and service chases. The emergency schematics he had cunningly downloaded during the gala's reception were invaluable. He marked the position of surveillance cameras, their blind spots, and the location of the ship's server hub. Dismantling Rostova's operation demanded a multifaceted strategy. Severing communications, cutting off potential reinforcements, and ensuring Zendaya's safety. He knew she was the ultimate target. The vessel vibrated, a deep, resonant tremor that reverberated through its steel frame. He stilled, his senses heightened. The engine's rhythm remained unchanged. This was something unrelated. He glanced at his wristwatch, a bespoke instrument equipped with an array of sensors. A faint, almost imperceptible blip appeared on the frequency analyzer, a high-pitched signal, concealed within the ship's emergency broadcast. A coded distress call, and he knew, without question, its sender. Zendaya. A slow, predatory smile etched itself onto Jason's lips. Time to engage. 24 hours. Attention, passengers and crew of the Serenity. This is Eva Rostova speaking. Her voice, amplified through the ship's PA system, sliced through the celebratory atmosphere like a shard of ice. Laughter died in throats. Clinking champagne glasses stilled midair. On the Lido deck, Jason Statham leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He'd felt the subtle shift in the ship's rhythm hours ago, a barely perceptible tremor in the air that only a man attuned to danger would notice. Rostova's announcement confirmed his suspicions. He hadn't trusted this so-called eco-charity event from the start. Too slick, too convenient. Some of you may be wondering why your phones aren't working. Rostova continued, her tone hardening. Consider it a temporary inconvenience. A necessary measure, given the circumstances. A pause. We are Ocean's Fury, and we are here to make a statement. Jason scanned the crowd, fear rippled through them. A visible wave, he spotted a few of Rostova's people, young, hardened faces, trying to blend in, but their eyes betrayed them that he needed to move. Scattered throughout this vessel, Rostova's voice boomed, are strategically placed explosives, enough to send the Serenity to the bottom of the ocean. We have a list of demands. If they are not met within 24 hours, the consequences will be catastrophic. 24 hours. The clock had started. Jason slipped away from the deck, melting into the panicked throngs. He needed to isolate himself, assess the situation, formulate a plan. He made his way to his cabin, a modest suite near the stern. Inside, he pulled a nondescript duffel bag from under the BIT contained the tools of his trade. A silenced pistol, a compact diving rig, and a collection of specialized gadgets. He knew the ship's blueprints intimately, had studied them during the pre-boarding security consultation. He'd been hired for a convenient pretext, it seemed now. The engine room was his target. Control the engines, control the ship, but getting there wouldn't be easy. Rostova would have secured the internal access points. He changed into a dark, skin-tight wetsuit. The air hung heavy with the scent of salt and diesel fuel as he made his way to the lower decks. Reaching a secluded service hatch near the waterline, he opened it, revealing the churning ocean. The cold water was a shock, a sharp intake of breath. He sealed his mask, adjusted his regulator, and slipped into the inky blackness. The underwater currents tugged at him as he navigated towards the engine room's external intake vents. The Serenity was a leviathan, its immense hull a dark shadow against the faint light filtering from the surface. He located the grate covering the intake, pulled out a laser cutter, and began to work. The whine of the cutter was almost deafening in the silence of the deep, but he was careful, precise. Inside the engine room, the roar of the engines was a physical assault. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked his way through the maze of pipes and machinery. Rostova's people would be patrolling, but they wouldn't expect an attack from the sea. He located the communications hub, a tangled mess of wires and circuit boards. This was it. He pulled out a small EMP device, activated it, and stepped back. A high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by a satisfying crackle. The screens went blank. The ship was cut off. He had bought them time. 24 hours. It wouldn't be enough, but it was a start. Hidden passages. Zendaya pressed her palm against the cold steel wall, her fingers tracing the barely perceptible seam. It was exactly where the vintage schematics, practically memorized during weeks of pre-gala briefings on the Ocean's Fury, indicated it would be. A faint click. Then the wall panel slid inward, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage. Dust motes danced in the weak emergency lighting, illuminating the cramped space. The scent of stale oil and disuse filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the perfumed opulence of the ballroom she'd just fled. Here goes nothing, she murmured, stepping inside. The panel slid shut behind her with a soft thud, plunging her into near darkness. She activated the tiny penlight she'd discreetly clipped to her gown, its beam cutting a feeble swathe through the gloom. The passage was barely wide enough for her to squeeze through, her designer dress snagging occasionally on exposed pipes and wiring. The drone of the ship's engines was muted here, replaced by a claustrophobic silence that amplified the frantic thumping of her own heart. She moved quickly, referencing the blueprints in her mind, navigating a maze of turns and bifurcations. This route, designed for emergency repairs and crew access, bypassed the main decks, offering a chance to reach the bridge undetected. But with every twist and turn, the risk of discovery heightened. Meanwhile, 2 decks above, Jason moved with the practiced grace of a predator. He'd already neutralized the guard posted at the service entrance near the kitchens. A swift, silent takedown involving a well-placed pressure point and a muffled chokehold now. He was making his way toward the security hub, a knot of tension tightening in his gut with each step that he rounded a corner. His senses on high alert, and nearly collided with 2 of Rostova's goons. They were bulky men, armed with automatic weapons, their eyes scanning the corridor with an air of nervous anticipation. He hadn't planned on engaging so soon, but there was no turning back. "Hold it right there," one of them barked, raising his weapon. Jason didn't hesitate. He exploded into motion, a blur of calculated violence. He disarmed the first guard with a lightning-fast strike, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Before the second man could react, Jason slammed a fist into his throat, cutting off his air supply. The first guard, momentarily stunned, lunged at him, but Jason sidestepped the attack and delivered a brutal elbow strike to the man's temple. Both men crumpled to the deck. Unconscious, he retrieved their weapons, stashing them out of sight. Time was of the essence. He needed to reach the security hub and disable the ship's internal communication systems. Every moment that passed increased the likelihood of Rostova discovering their presence. Below decks, Zendaya reached a junction. The air was noticeably warmer here, the smell of fuel oil stronger. According to the blueprints, this passage led directly to the engine room, a high-security zone. She knew Rostova would likely have guards posted there, but it was the most direct route to the bridge. She paused. Listening intently, she could hear the distant rumble of the engines, a deafening mechanical roar that vibrated through the ship's hull. She took a deep breath and continued forward, her hand instinctively reaching for the small, ornate hairpin she'd subtly sharpened before the gala at IT was a pathetic weapon. But it was all she had. Jason reached the security hub. The door was locked, secured with a keypad. He pulled a small, unassuming device from his pocket, a universal bypass tool. He attached it to the keypad, the device humming softly as it worked its magic. Seconds later, the door clicked open. Inside, 2 more guards were monitoring a bank of screens, their attention focused on the various security cameras scattered throughout the ship. They didn't notice Jason enter until it was too late. He moved with ruthless efficiency, disabling one guard with a swift kick to the back of the knee, then tackling the other to the ground. A brief, brutal struggle ensued, ending with both men unconscious and Jason in control of the hub. He quickly disabled the internal communication systems, cutting off Rostova's ability to coordinate her forces. Then, he accessed the ship's security cameras, scanning for Zendaya. He found her on a camera near the engine room, her face illuminated by the penlight. Her expression a mixture of determination and fear. Rostova's men were converging on her location. He needed to reach her, and fast. Galley gauntlet. The stainless steel of the galley reflected Zendaya's wide, panicked eyes. One moment, she was reaching for a bottle of sparkling water. The next, a hulking figure blocked the doorway, a machete glinting wickedly in his hand. Marco the Hammer Moretti. His reputation preceded him, a brutal whisper that had reached even the pampered ears of the gala guests. "Looking for something, little bird?" he rasped. His voice a gravelly growl that he advanced, the machete held loosely but menacingly at his side. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood, a faint scent clinging to him. Zendaya's mind raced, panic threatened to overwhelm her, but the memory of the children who would benefit from tonight's auction flickered in her mind. A small flame of resolve. She wasn't going down without a fight. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy cast-iron skillet, and swung it with all her might. The skillet connected with Moretti's shoulder, a satisfying thud, but he barely flinched. He grunted, his eyes narrowing, and lunged. Zendaya ducked, the machete whistling past her ear, close enough to feel the displacement of air. The galley was a confined space, a deadly obstacle course of gleaming surfaces and sharp corners. She used it to her advantage, weaving between the stainless steel counters and dodging past stacks of neatly arranged plates. Moretti slowed. By his bulk, struggled to keep up. He slashed wildly, tearing a gash in a stack of tablecloths. Zendaya kicked out a tray of silverware, scattering it across the floor, a temporary distraction. She scrambled over the slippery metal, gaining precious seconds, spotting a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. She ripped it free with a desperate heave. She aimed the nozzle at Moretti and unleashed a cloud of white foam that he roared in fury. Blinded and sputtering, Zendaya didn't wait. She scrambled past him, ignoring the burning sensation in her lungs from the extinguisher spray. She slammed the galley door shut, fumbling with the lock. It was a flimsy thing, no match for the hammer, but it would buy her a few more seconds. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Jason found Rostova calmly sipping tea. The control panel glowed with a malevolent green light. Her face, illuminated by the displays, was serene, almost bored. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tension crackling in the room. "Jason," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "So predictable. I knew you'd come." "Where's the detonator?" Jason demanded, his eyes scanning the room, searching for the device that could turn the ship into a floating inferno. Rostova chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Detonator? Oh, Jason, you wound me. You think I'd be so pedestrian?" She gestured to the control panel. "Everything is integrated. A single command, and..." She trailed off, her eyes glinting. Jason took a step closer, his muscles coiled and ready. "Don't do this, Eva. There are innocent people on this ship." "Innocent?" Rostova scoffed. "They're complicit. They enjoy the fruits of a dying planet." She tapped a key on the console. "Besides, I've already started." A low rumble vibrated through the ship, followed by a sickening crunch. Jason stumbled, grabbing onto a console to steady himself. "What was that?" he barked, his voice tight with apprehension. Rostova smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "A little insurance. A secondary explosive, placed in the engine room, just in case someone managed to disable my primary charges. You see, Jason, I always have a contingency." The ship lurched again, throwing Jason off balance. The bridge alarm blared, a piercing shriek that cut through the storm. The deck was beginning to list dangerously. Rostova raised her teacup to her lips, her eyes never leaving Jason's. "Checkmate," she whispered. "Inferno. Inferno." The world twisted into a mangled mess of heat and sound. Jason, thrown against a marble pillar, tasted blood and ozone. The blast had ripped through the starboard side, tearing open decks like a child dismantling a toy. He pushed himself up, ears ringing, the acrid smell of burning plastic stinging his nostrils. Panic, thick and suffocating, clawed at his throat, but he choked it down. People needed him. The grand ballroom, once a shimmering spectacle of gowns and glittering chandeliers, was now a grotesque tableau of twisted metal and broken bodies. Sprinklers sputtered uselessly, adding a layer of steam to the already unbearable heat. Screams echoed, mingling with the crackle of flames that licked hungrily at the wreckage. "Help me, please." A woman, her dress torn and smudged with soot, was pinned beneath a fallen section of the ornate ceiling. Jason scrambled towards her, ignoring the searing pain in his ribs. The heat intensified as he neared the flames. Licking at his exposed skin, he heaved at the debris, his muscles screaming in protest. Until the woman was free, he hoisted her onto his shoulder, her weight surprisingly light, and fought his way back through the inferno outside. On the ravaged deck, chaos reigned. Lifeboats were being lowered haphazardly, some already listing dangerously. Crew members, faces etched with terror, struggled to maintain order. Jason deposited the woman near a group of paramedics, then plunged back into the ship. He couldn't save everyone, but he could damn well try. Meanwhile, deep in the bowels of the ship, Zendaya wrestled with a panel sparking angrily. The galley had been remarkably spared from the worst of the explosion, shielded somewhat by reinforced bulkheads. But the electrical systems were a disaster. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead as she traced the maze of wires. Her fingers nimble despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. Ocean's Fury had clearly planned this meticulously. The main power conduits had been rerouted to a secondary system, feeding directly into the explosives they'd planted throughout the ship. If she could sever that connection, cut off the power supply, she might be able to neutralize the remaining bombs. But the longer it took, the more likely they were to detonate them remotely. Come on, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper above the hum of the emergency generators. A wave of dizziness washed over her. the lingering effects of the initial blast and the stifling heat. She grabbed onto a nearby pipe for support, fighting to regain her focus. She identified the primary relay, a hulking metal box humming with lethal energy. Using a heavy-duty wrench she found discarded on the floor, she began to methodically dismantle the connections, sparks flying as she severed each wire. The air grew thick with the smell of burning rubber and ozone. She had to be precise. One wrong move and she could trigger a surge, frying the entire system or worse. Jason emerged onto the deck, coughing and covered in soot. He scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for Zendaya. He hadn't seen her since the explosion, and a cold dread coiled in his gut. Had she made it out? Or was she still trapped inside? He spotted a harried crew member trying to organize the evacuation. He grabbed him by the arm, his grip like a vice. Zendaya Coleman. Have you seen her? The crew member shook his head, his eyes wide with panic. Everyone's on their own, mate. Just trying to get people off this bloody death trap. Jason released him, a wave of fury washing over him. He couldn't rely on anyone, he was on his own. Again, he knew he had to find her. Back in the galley, Zendaya severed the final connection. The humming stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. She leaned back against the wall, gasping for air, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Had it worked? Would it be enough? Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the galley into darkness. A moment later, the emergency generators kicked in, bathing the room in a harsh, unforgiving light. But something was different. There was no ominous countdown timer on the control panel, no automated message from Ocean's Fury gloating about their victory. She had done it. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a new, chilling realization dawned on her. The lights had gone out, but the emergency power was running. If the explosives were still armed, but cut off from the ship's primary power, then they were likely running on backup batteries. And those batteries wouldn't last forever. Time was still running out. Showdown on deck. The fire was a living thing, licking at the metal bulkheads, turning the corridor into a furnace. Jason coughed, pulling his damp handkerchief higher over his nose. He could feel the heat searing his lungs with each breath, but he pressed on. His boots slipping on the slick, melted plastic. Each step was a gamble, a dance between survival and oblivion. He relied on instinct, the years of training honed into a razor's edge. Rostova wanted to slow him down, make him succumb to the chaos. He wouldn't. He reached the security checkpoint, now a smoldering ruin. A corpse lay slumped against the shattered console, the security guard's face frozen in a mask of terror. Jason ignored it, vaulting over the body and ripping the console panel open. Wires spat sparks, the acrid smell of ozone filling the air. This was it, the central control hub that he needed to override the lockdown, open a path to the engine room. That he bypassed the keypad, fingers flying over the damaged circuits, forcing the system to cough up its secrets. Meanwhile, deep within the bowels of the ship, Zendaya worked with a focused intensity that belied her earlier apprehension. The engine room was a cacophony of roaring machinery and pulsing energy. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she traced the schematic diagrams, her earlier anxieties replaced by a desperate need to contribute. Rostova had underestimated her, seeing only a celebrity face. Now, she would show them all. With a final click, she rerouted the auxiliary power grid. The lights flickered, then stabilized, drawing energy away from Rostova's precious bomb network. A wave of satisfaction washed over her as she pictured Jason, battling his way through the inferno. She'd bought him some time. Jason felt the shift, a subtle easing of the ship's grip. Doors unlocked ahead. He punched in the override codes, then charged through the now open portal toward the upper decks. Time was running out. He could hear the storm raging outside, a primal scream echoing the madness within the ship. He emerged onto the main deck, the wind tearing at him with ferocious intensity. Rain lashed down, blurring his vision. The ship pitched violently, throwing him against the railing. The deck was deserted, except for one figure standing silhouetted against the churning sky. Rostova. She stood braced, her dark hair whipping around her face. In her hand, she held a wicked-looking combat knife. "So you made it," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I expected nothing less. It ends here, Eva." Jason yelled, his voice strained. "It ends when I say it ends." She lunged, the knife flashing in the dim light. Jason dodged, the blade whistling past his ear. He returned the attack, using the momentum of the ship to his advantage, driving Rostova back towards the edge of the deck. They grappled. Their bodies slick with rain and sweat. The ship lurched again, throwing them both off balance. Jason saw his chance. He slammed his fist into Rostova's jaw, sending her reeling. She recovered quickly, her eyes burning with fury. She spat blood onto the deck. "You think you can stop me? This is bigger than you, bigger than this pathetic cruise ship. It's about innocent people, Eva. People you're willing to sacrifice for your cause." Rostova laughed, a harsh, grating sound that was swallowed by the wind. "Innocence is a luxury we can no longer afford. The planet is dying, and they are all complicit." She came at him again, a whirlwind of fury and desperation. Jason parried the blows, his muscles screaming in protest. The storm was a relentless opponent, adding to the chaos, making every movement a struggle. He knew he couldn't win a straight fight. He needed to use the environment to turn the storm against her. He feinted, drawing her closer to the railing. Another massive wave crashed over the bow, sending a wall of water washing across the deck. Rostova lost her footing, scrambling to regain her balance. Jason seized the opportunity, grabbing her wrist and twisting. The knife clattered onto the deck. He didn't hesitate. With a roar of effort, he used her momentum, leveraging her weight against the force of the wind and the waves. Rostova screamed as she tumbled over the railing, disappearing into the raging sea below. Jason stood there, gasping for breath, the rain washing the blood from his face. The ship continued to buck and heave, but the madness, for now, had subsided. The storm raged on, a testament to the power of nature, but on board, hope flickered. The bombs were disarmed and he had bought them a chance. But he knew, deep down, that this was far from over. Ocean's fury, like the storm itself, would be back. Aftermath. The wire cutters sliced through the last connection. Jason held his breath, waiting for the telltale click of failure, the screech of alarms. Nothing. He exhaled, the stale, metallic scent of the bomb clinging to the air point one by one. He'd found them, deactivated them, each a miniature exercise in controlled panic, the last one. Hidden inside a gilded cage holding a flock of decorative parakeets, now scattered in a panicked, iridescent cloud, had been the trickiest. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, smearing grime across his forehead. The ballroom, once a glittering spectacle of wealth and privilege, was now a wreck. Overturned tables, shattered glass, and the acrid tang of tear gas hung heavy. The air thrummed with the low hum of the ship's generators, a sound that had previously been a comforting backdrop to the gala, now a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. The ship's security team, looking pale but determined, were rounding up the remaining members of Ocean's Fury. They were a motley crew, a mix of hardened zealots and wide-eyed teenagers who looked like they'd gotten in way over their heads. Jason watched them being led away, their faces a mixture of defiance and fear. He knew Rostova wouldn't be among them. She was too clever, too ruthless to be caught so easily. A hand touched his arm. Zendaya, her dress, a shimmering emerald gown, was torn in several places, but her eyes held a spark of unwavering strength. "You saved us," she said, her voice husky. "Not yet," Jason replied, his gaze fixed on the panoramic windows lining the ballroom. "She got away." Zendaya followed his line of sight. "She'll be back," she said, a chilling certainty in her tone. This wasn't just about money or attention. This was a message, and she'll want to deliver it in person. Jason nodded, his jaw tight. He didn't need convincing. He could feel it in his gut. A primal instinct honed by years of facing down danger. Rostova was out there, licking her wounds, plotting her next move. A microphone screeched, startling them both. The ship's captain, a burly man with a weathered face, stood on a makeshift stage, his voice amplified through the ship's PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice strained but firm. "I'm pleased to inform you that the situation is under control. The authorities have been notified and are en route. I want to express my deepest gratitude to Mr. Statham for his extraordinary courage and quick thinking." A ripple of applause spread through the room. a wave of relief washing over the survivors. Zendaya squeezed Jason's arm. "They want a hero?" she murmured. "Give them one." Jason reluctantly stepped forward as Zendaya took to the stage. Her voice, clear and resonant, cut through the lingering tension. "We owe Mr. Statham a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid," she began, her eyes locking with Jason's. "He acted selflessly, courageously, to protect us all. But we must also remember that the threat that brought us here today has not disappeared. It merely shifted form. We must remain vigilant, aware, and united in our commitment to safeguarding what we hold dear." Her words, though veiled, were a clear warning. Rostova was still out there, a viper waiting to strike. The applause swelled again, but this time, it was laced with a subtle undercurrent of unease. Jason slipped away from the crowd, heading towards the upper deck. The night air was cool and salty, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere below. He leaned against the railing, scanning the dark expanse of the ocean. In the distance, a small, dark shape bobbed on the waves, a speedboat heading away from the ship at full throttle. He watched it disappear into the darkness, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. He knew he would see Eva Rostova again. Their dance had just begun. The ocean was vast, but it wasn't big enough for both of them. He knew what she was capable of. She was ruthless, ambitious, and utterly convinced of the righteousness of her cause. That he also knew that he would be ready next time. There would be no escape.